Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers unlawful orders, obedience to authority, and officer conduct, and is brought to us from the public record of the city of Keller, Texas. You can find a link to the original video in the description below. Before we dive into the interaction, I want to give a big thanks to the sponsor of this episode, Surfshark. We all know that VPN services can help to protect your privacy and ensure that all of your identifying information is kept safe. But VPNs like Surfshark offer their users so much more than digital security. Online businesses know how affluent their customers are, what devices they use, and what they're willing to pay. That's why people from different countries see different prices for digital products and services. With Surfshark, you can avoid price discrimination for flights, car rentals, hotels, and more by hiding your location and identity online. A Surfshark subscription is totally unlimited, which means that you can use it on as many devices as you like, and even on all of them at once. No other VPN service offers that much accessibility. Right now, Surfshark is offering the ATA community an 83% discount with an additional 3 months completely free. With 24-hour customer service and a 30-day money-back guarantee, you have absolutely nothing to lose. So click the link in the description to claim your exclusive offer now. Thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring this episode. On August 15, 2020, 22-year-old Dylan Puente was driving to his grandmother's house when Keller Police Sergeant Blake Shimonek stopped him for allegedly making a wide turn. Shortly after the release of a 2-minute edit of the hour-long body cam footage from various mainstream media outlets, this interaction went viral. And although this episode is longer than the average ATA coverage, I highly recommend watching to the end so that you can leave this episode fully informed of the legal and psychological nuance surrounding this encounter.
320, go ahead and send me a unit when you got it available. Hey, roll your window back down.
What's up?
My name is Sergeant Schmont, the Keller Police Department. The reason being stopped today, you made a wide right turn when you turned from 1709 to 377. Any reason why you're rolling your window up when I walk up to this car?
No, sir.
You've been driving it down for the past mile.
I just rolled it up.
Alright, step out of the car for me. Step out. Do not shut that window. Open it now. Step out. Right here. Face that direction. Face that direction. Put your hands right here behind your back. Don't move. Do you understand? Why are you acting so suspicious?
Because I'm scared.
Well, you're rolling your window up when I'm walking up on scene for a routine traffic stop. Ain't nothing going on. You roll your window up. What does that look like to me?
I mean, I'm just rolling it up because it's for my safety.
For your safety?
Yeah. Nothing. I rolled up my window.
Take off.
That's my dad.
No, sir. Yeah.
I rolled up my window.
320, give me a unit code now.
And he got mad because I rolled up my window.
Step right here.
Window down? I rolled it up.
Step right your feet.
Well, that's what happened, huh?
Yeah.
You're about to be arrested for blocking the roadway if you don't park and get out.
I rolled
Park and get out?
I rolled
Park
up
over there.
You said I can. It's my right.
You are interfering with my job. You need to go park over there.
I'm just reporting you.
I rolled up my window like you said. It was my right to roll up my window.
No, it's not.
Sergeant Shimonek tells Mr. Puente that he does not have a right to roll up his window during a traffic stop, but there are no laws that specifically forbid doing so. Although citizens are well within their rights to roll up their window during a traffic stop, doing so will likely result in being extracted from the vehicle. In the 1977 Supreme Court case of Pennsylvania versus Mims, the court held that officers may order the driver of a stopped vehicle to exit the vehicle if they have been lawfully detained. The court reasoned that an officer's order to exit the vehicle constituted a minimal intrusion into the liberty of the detained citizen, and the safety offered to an officer by such an order far outweighed the potential inconvenience to the detainee. As noted by the court, quote, "What is at most a mere inconvenience cannot prevail when balanced against legitimate concerns for the officer's safety." From Sergeant Shimonek's perspective, Mr. Puente's decision to roll up his window may very well have appeared to be suspicious behavior, and the sergeant was well within his authority to order Mr. Puente out of his vehicle. All that said, Mr. Puente obeyed Sergeant Shimonek's order to roll the window back down and appeared to be peacefully complying with all of his requests. Once Mr. Puente began to exit the car, he attempted to roll his window back up so that he could lock his vehicle without the officer being able to see inside of it, and the sergeant orders him to keep the window down. Mr. Puente was under no legal obligation to obey the sergeant's order to keep the window down as he exited the vehicle, and it was not unreasonable for Mr. Puente to want to secure his vehicle before exiting it to speak with the sergeant.
320, got in the back up and route. Do you have any weapons on you?
No, sir.
All right. Is your ID in your wallet?
Yes, sir.
Why on earth are you acting like this?
I'm just nervous, man.
Look,
Okay, I'm
it was a
sorry.
routine traffic stop, all right?
Yes.
I've never met you before.
Yes, I know.
And then the first thing you do is you roll up your window like that, okay?
I thought it was allowed, so we can roll up my window and hand out my license to you.
How do you think it would look to me if you're rolling up your window when you walk up?
I guess suspicious a little bit.
Suspicious.
Here, Mr. Puente admits that his actions may have appeared suspicious after being questioned by Sergeant Shimonik, and perfectly demonstrates why the right to remain silent is such an important aspect of police interactions. The factors associated with Mr. Puente's admission extend far beyond the legal system, and stem largely from the psychological elements at play whenever an individual interacts with an authority figure. One of the most famous studies of obedience in psychology was carried out in 1961 by the renowned Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram. Mr. Milgram wanted to investigate whether Germans were particularly obedient to authority figures, as this was a common explanation for the Nazi killings in World War II. In the study, each participant was paired with another person, and they drew lots to find out who would be the learner and who would be the teacher. However, the drawing process was fixed so that the participant would always assume the role of the teacher, and the learners were actually aware of the study and merely pretending to be a participant. The teacher and the learner were then taken into separate rooms that were directly across from one another, and the teacher was informed that the learner was outfitted with electrodes that would deliver a shock whenever activated by the generator being controlled by the teacher. The learner was tasked with learning a list of paired words, and whenever the learner gave a wrong answer, the teacher was instructed by the experimenter to deliver a shock. With each wrong answer, the intensity of the shock increased, with the scale of the shock eventually reaching a fatal level. In reality, the learner was merely pretending to be shocked from the other room, and was instructed to give mostly wrong answers. Eventually, the learner would stop responding altogether, but the experimenter pressed the teacher to continue shocking the learner in the absence of an answer. When the study was concluded, 2/3 of the teachers had continued to shock the learner to the highest level of 450 volts, and all the participants continued to 300 volts. The results of this study demonstrated that ordinary people are extremely likely to follow the orders of authority figures, even to the extent of killing an innocent human being. Obedience to authority plays a role in every police interaction, and Mr. Puente likely felt that answering Sergeant Shimonik's questions was required of him. It is safe to assume that Mr. Puente only agreed with the sergeant to avoid the consequences of not agreeing, and this is a classic example of how obedience is taken advantage of by members of law enforcement. Although I highly doubt that the sergeant was aware of the psychological aspects at play and maliciously took advantage of them, this part of the encounter demonstrates both a dire need to educate officers on the psychology of detainees and the need to educate citizens on their right to remain silent. As Sergeant Shimonik was questioning Mr. Puente's father, Marco Puente, walks to the sidewalk opposite of the interaction and continues filming his son's interaction.
So, it's even more suspicious, right? You've been cruising, it's a hot day, you've been cruising around with your window down.
Yes, sir.
And the first thing I do when I walk up is you roll your window up.
Yes, sir.
Then I say, step out of the car, and then you proceed to roll your window up all the way, and I can no longer see you.
I can roll my window and then shut the door and lock it. That's
By who?
what I was told.
By who?
My dad,
Okay.
by the law, the government.
Okay. When you're doing that, you're taking away, I can't see anything. Apart from the fact it's rude. It's rude, is it not? I'm trying to have a conversation with you. You roll up the window, and I'm trying to do my job, and now you're taking away, just watch him.
What? I'm stand here?
Yep. Better yet, arrest him.
For what?
For blocking the roadway.
Blocking the road?
Yep.
Sergeant Shimonik orders Officer Ankit Tomer to arrest Mr. Marco for obstructing the roadway, and Officer Tomer unquestioningly complies. Texas Penal Code 42.03 criminalizes the act of intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly obstructing a public street, or disobeying a reasonable request or order to move issued by a member of law enforcement. Unlike many states, Texas officers have been afforded the authority to arrest citizens for petty crimes that carry no jail time, such as traffic infractions. In the 2001 Supreme Court case of Atwater v. City of Lago Vista, the court held that a citizen's Fourth Amendment rights are not violated when the subject is arrested for driving without a seatbelt, and that such an arrest for a misdemeanor that is punishable only by a fine does not constitute an unreasonable seizure under the Fourth Amendment. This ruling authorized officers to make a custodial arrest of a citizen without balancing costs and benefits or determining whether the arrest was necessary. There are only 3 motor vehicle offenses that Texas officers cannot effectuate an arrest under: speeding, open container violations, and texting while driving, which, ironically enough, are also the top 3 causes of car accidents in the U.S. The Atwater ruling opened the floodgates for malicious and unnecessary arrests. And according to a 2019 study conducted by order of the Sandra Bland Act of 2017, more than 45,000 Texas drivers were arrested at traffic stops for Class C misdemeanors in 2018 alone. If Mr. Marco had been legitimately violating Code 42.03, then Sergeant Shimonik would have been within his authority to arrest him. We will discuss whether or not Mr. Marco actually violated the code in a moment, but the point of this section is to highlight the fact that Texas officers have nearly unfettered authority to arrest citizens for any violation, no matter how trivial or victimless that violation may be. After ordering Officer Tomer to arrest Mr. Marco, Sergeant Shimonik orders Mr. Puente to sit on the curb while he assists Officer Tomer. When the sergeant approaches Mr. Marco and grabs his arm, a small scuffle breaks out, which results in Mr. Marco being thrown to the ground, maced, and arrested. Once the officers place Mr. Marco into the back of a patrol car, Sergeant Shimonik relays his version of events to a fellow officer. Let's compare the sergeant's story to what actually took place.
So, kid's acting nervous as can be. I said, buddy, step out of the car. He proceeds to start rolling up the car, and I thought he was going to drive off on me. Pull the door open, he steps out, no issue. I had to go to detain him. Dad is cruising down the road, stops in the middle of the road. I said, leave. You need to leave. He's feeding son. No, this is neighbor who lives over here. He's feeding son, telling him what to do. Step right here.
I rolled it up.
Step right your feet.
Well, that's what happened, huh?
And I said, no, sir, you need to leave. I said, sir, if you don't leave, I said, you're going to be detained for blocking the roadway here.
Yeah.
You're about to be arrested for blocking the roadway if you don't park and get out. And so then he proceeds to back up all the way, parks over there, and he walks up into my scene multiple times. I said, you're done, you're under arrest. I'm going to take him into custody for the traffic violation and interference, and he resisted, so he got sprayed. We're taken to the ground. He came out down there. He's videoing us, and now I guess we got family members here.
As you can see, the sergeant's version of events are a far stretch from what actually happened, and the sergeant's police report was filled with similar inaccuracies. In the report, Sergeant Shimonik claimed that Mr. Marco approached him from behind, but the video shows that was untrue. The sergeant went as far as claiming that he did not notice Mr. Marco's vehicle when it approached, and that it wasn't until Mr. Marco yelled at him that he became aware of his presence. The sergeant also stated that Mr. Marco refused to move his vehicle after being ordered to do so, and that he remained in the roadway for an additional 30 seconds to continue yelling, which is a blatant lie. The report goes on to state that, due to officer safety, Sergeant Shimonik decided to arrest Mr. Marco for obstructing the roadway and obstructing governmental operations. Texas Penal Code 38.15 is the state's obstruction law, and even if the sergeant's story were true and Mr. Marco was yelling at the officers, this code provides an exception for any interruption, disruption, impediment, or interference that consists of speech only, which renders this charge invalid. Sergeant Shimonik's malicious behavior does not end there. And once his lieutenant arrived on the scene, the sergeant recounted his inaccurate story to his superior and informed him that he intended to arrest Mr. Puente for the wide turn violation so that he could search his vehicle without obtaining consent or probable cause.
Kid right now is only detained. He's sitting in the back of my car. We've had a very lengthy conversation. He's been reasonable. I'm quite certain there's narcotics in the car, so I think I'm going to arrest him for the wide right turn. He's got a history of narcotics. He was telling me, giving me all sorts of clues. So I think I'm going to arrest him for the wide right turn.
The lieutenant authorizes Sergeant Shimonik to arrest Mr. Puente, and the sergeant searches the vehicle but does not find any drugs or weapons. Mr. Puente was taken to jail, and his vehicle was towed. Following the encounter, the Keller Police Department launched a proactive internal investigation into the incident, and eventually released the full body and dashcam footage along with all the paperwork from the investigation. The investigation resulted in Sergeant Shimonik being demoted to a patrol officer, with the opportunity to reapply for his sergeant position in 1 year. Officer Tomer did not face any disciplinary action. All charges against Mr. Marco were dropped, and all of the fines and fees associated with his arrest were refunded. Mr. Marco has filed a federal lawsuit against Officer Shimonik and Officer Tomer, which prompted Keller Police Chief Brad Fortune to personally apologize to Mr. Marco and admit that his officers were wrong. According to the New York Times, Mr. Marco accepted the chief's apology as a nice gesture, but also stated that he believed more needed to be done to hold the police accountable. The executive director of the Texas Municipal Police Association, Kevin Lawrence, told the New York Times that a lawyer with the association was monitoring the lawsuit against Officers Shimonik and Tomer, but the group does not represent the Keller Police Department or have a lawyer involved in the litigation, despite the fact that both of the officers were members of the organization. He ironically went on to say, quote, "This is one of those cases where I would say you may want to take a step back and not take the pleading at face value." At the time of writing this episode, the Keller City Council has announced a special executive session to take place on December 29th for a full briefing on the incident. And although that session is not included in this episode, you can find updates regarding the session's findings in the description below. Overall, Officer Shimonik, Officer Tomer, and the Keller Police Department get an F for arresting Mr. Marco when he committed no crimes, arresting Mr. Puente for no other reason than to search his vehicle, and for escalating what could have been a routine traffic stop into a physical altercation. Officer Shimonik abused the philosophy of officer safety and exercised poor discretion throughout the entirety of this interaction. Nothing he did during this encounter advanced the safety of his community, and much of his decision-making can be linked to his inflated ego and his efforts to justify his actions. Although officer safety is a legitimate concern during any police encounter, it should never be used to justify misconduct. And this type of behavior only serves to erode the public's trust in law enforcement and make it more difficult for other officers to legitimately justify their actions in the name of officer safety. The most troubling aspect of this encounter is the department's response to the officer's conduct. Much like the Revere Police Department's response to misconduct that I covered last week, the KPD's decision to demote Officer Shimonik rather than firing him conveys the message that officers who commit blatant acts of misconduct will be allowed to continue serving in their official capacity. And there's absolutely no justice in this decision. The internal affairs investigation resulted in nothing more than a PR stunt, and I struggle to see any option for justice other than Officer Shimonik's termination. If departments continue to perpetuate the notion that officers have the highest job security in America, then progress toward addressing the issues facing the American policing system will be significantly dampened, even more than they already are by nonsensical court rulings like the Atwood case. There is no excuse for Officer Shimonik's conduct or the department's lackluster response to that conduct. And it will be interesting to see how the Keller City Council handles this situation. As for Mr. Puente and Mr. Marco, I cannot justify issuing a grade to their conduct, because they were both wholly out of control of every aspect of this interaction, and nothing they could have done differently would have made an impact on the outcome. There is very little to critique on the side of Mr. Marco and his son, and that's mostly due to the fact that they did not have an opportunity to contest Officer Shimonik's conduct. While it is true that Mr. Puente could have exercised his right to silence, his reluctance to do so stemmed from a well-established psychological ineptitude that was arguably out of his control. Mr. Puente was cordial and cooperative throughout the encounter, and despite being obviously mistreated by the officer, he complied with all of the officer's orders. I commend Mr. Puente for remaining calm and collected, and refusing to allow his emotions to dictate the outcome of this encounter. Mr. Marco also deserves recognition for having the awareness to begin filming this interaction and not allowing Officer Shimonik to intimidate him or discourage him from recording. Nothing Mr. Marco did violated the law, and the department confirmed that by dropping all of the charges against him. Mr. Marco had no time to react to Officer Shimonik's decision to arrest him, and it makes sense that he would be somewhat resistant given that he was not able to process the logic of the officer's orders. Mr. Marco went from peacefully exercising his First Amendment right to record the police to being maced and arrested in a matter of seconds. And instead of making an effort to reason with Mr. Marco, both of the officers jumped straight to physically restraining him without any legal justification. I have no doubt that Mr. Marco will fare well in the courtroom, and I commend him for following up this encounter with the proper legal action.
John Lang here, the creator of Audit the Audit. If you've made it to the end of this episode, I would like to extend my personal thanks for taking the time to absorb all of the information surrounding this encounter. And you should give yourself a pat on the back for being so dedicated to being informed. This episode is the final episode for the year 2020, and I sincerely appreciate all of you who have given your support to this channel. This has been a tough year for everyone, but I am humbled to have been a part of the ATA community, and I look forward to bringing you more content in 2021. I hope that ATA has brought you all a plethora of entertainment and educational value, and I wish each and every one of you the absolute best. Again, thank you for taking the time to watch this episode, and here's to many more to come. Cheers.